Welcome to everybody for this session. I can promise you I will keep it on time. That's about all I can really promise. All right, Safe Cities Summit, and the title of this panel, or the subject anyway, is the community impact, the impact on a community, any community that, and now so many communities in this country that have had the experience of mass shootings. None knows it better than Annapolis. 1 year ago, tomorrow, the shooting at the Annapolis Capitol. It's one of those events, I suspect, certainly true for me, that where we can all remember where we were when we heard about it and the immediate aftermath. So I think the community impact we talk about this morning ought to be the Annapolis community impact. And Rick Hutzel, let me ask you to start off. You obviously, at the Capitol, experienced it firsthand in the worst possible way. Now a year has gone by. Reflect for us on the impact on this community that you've lived in for a long time, that you know well, that you cover on a daily basis. What's been the impact?
So first off, let me answer the question that you asked me earlier, and I said I didn't want to talk about it because you asked me how we were doing. A lot of people ask us that. Our friends died, our world was changed, and I don't mean to make light of it in any way, but we're fine. I just want to tell everybody that we're fine. Good. We're taking care of ourselves. We are aware of the stress that is caused by this because of what we do. Journalism as a profession is not a normal way of life. You talk about people who die as a matter of course in your work. You talk about terrible things. One of the things that journalism, particularly community journalism, does is we focus on things that are good. We celebrate the successes. We point out the failures. We talk about the things that could be changed. And by its very nature, that is sometimes traumatic and stressful. So we deal with this as a profession. We as individuals, I think I can speak for my staff and say, we're fine. So thank you for the concern. In terms of the impact on the community.
Just to point out, Rick, you didn't, as a rule in your day-to-day life, you don't experience it in the first person plural. And you did a year ago.
It's not the same thing. No, we're not saying we are like people who have firsthand experience with crime. And yet, it is different standing next to it. Journalists run toward these things, not away from them. And it is, as a profession, a traumatically stressful profession. But I'm not sitting here saying feel sorry for us. That's not what I'm asking at all. People have expressed concern about us, and I just want to know those who do care, we're fine. In terms of the impact on the community, read today's story. It's funny, we think about words a lot. We think about things, do we use mugshots? Do we use this label or that label? And in writing the headline in today's story, we took the word victim out and went with the word suffered. We did not suffer through this, and we do not continue to suffer with the consequences of this alone. We wrote a story today about someone who worked at our paper as a teenager who was going through a number of things, and the shooting was just one more thing, and he couldn't, his stepmother said he just couldn't take it in. He killed himself. We know there were other stress reactions in the community. I think one of the best description of it is that we all grieved together. We all suffered through this together. And as a community, we can work toward whatever comes of it together. There's no closure. I want to make sure anybody who's here looking for closure today, it ain't happening. Annapolis will always be the place where this happened. It will always change our character. This discussion is important in that, but that's the impact on the community. It is permanent.
Kathleen?
I want to applaud everything that you said, and I think that that it's really accurate. I think you are fine, but you are forever changed. And one of the things that happens when you have a trauma like this in a community is that it tears at the fabric of the community. And with that, the healing has to begin. And what I've noticed and seen in my time, and I am a proud Southern Maryland, but spend a lot of time in Annapolis, is that this is a community that cares. And so the healing has been going on, and it's a collective healing, and it will continue. So I think that your point about the fact that there's no end point is really an important one for people to keep in mind, because trauma changes the brain, and it does change how we view our lives and our sense of safety. And for those that have that support, they do well. There are others that at this point are going to see manifestations of other kinds of concerning issues, and that they should be willing to seek help.
It had an enormous impact on this community. There's no question about it, and it started to show right away. The vigil that followed the next night, the parade on the 4th of July, and subsequent events illustrated just how the community felt about what happened, and also how they felt about their newspaper, that maybe they had taken for granted and now valued and certainly saw in a different way. So keep going, Pamela. Tell us from your perspective, and we'll just go right down here. What was the impact on Annapolis? What has been, what is the impact?
So, obviously, we were a traumatized community. Everybody remembers where they were at exactly the point when they heard about the Capitol shooting. In fact, the person who told me is sitting in the 7th row, and I will remember it as long as I live, as all of us will. Because this wasn't just some shooting elsewhere. This was Annapolis. We all know one another. I've known Rick for 10 years. Many of you knew the folk that this happened to. So it's inexplicable, and we will all suffer forever. There's just nothing else to be said.
So immediately I think about where I was. I was scheduled to be in that exact building at 2:30 for a dental appointment that I just happened to change that morning. But so for me personally, it had a tremendous impact that I lived walking distance, literally, away from where this occurred. But I want to speak specifically as a city. We're known as a tale of two cities. There's another Annapolis. And I like to speak from that perspective because that's the community I serve the most as a pastor, that there was no change or no significant impact on that community because that community is experiencing this all the time. So I did not see some major change in those communities in terms of coming to the aid of being one Annapolis. In fact, I think they've remained very divided, but yet going through the same thing. Same thing.
Vaughn?
Hello? Good? All right. The day that the Annapolis shooting happened, I was on my way to Sam's Club. We were getting food together for another person that died of gun violence. If you remember the shooting that happened on Honeysuckle Lane several years ago, well, since then, like, he's from the community of Wildwood, Benny Kirby, and every year we celebrate his life and do a kind of a stop the violence moment like we have in all the time. So when the shooting happened, I was stuck inside the Sam's Club, and it was everybody was bunkered down, and I'm like scared. So my feeling is I'm sad for my friend Benny, and I'm sad for everybody that we lost here. And like the bishop said, it's a tale of two cities. On December 12th, 2012, I was at my mom's house in Robinwood. I heard the shot that killed one of my friends, next door neighbor, like it was feet away. How that tore up our community is a friend that killed a friend, because in the neighborhood it's hard to de-escalate. they don't teach de-escalation in the neighborhood. It's you got to be strong. And so, like, I believe in one Annapolis, but one Annapolis got to include all of Annapolis, because, like, yeah, when the shooting happened, we, like the bishop said, we kind of okay, and because I had to get up to work and do the same thing that I had to do and act like it didn't happen, because my job is to serve the people that killed each other that day.
Darius Stanton, add your thoughts and reflect on Bishop Coates' point that for his community, it was certainly not the first time.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, the day of the shooting at the Capitol, I was on my way on Route 50 to my doctor's office in that same building. So I was actually scheduled to be there probably, I couldn't get there because of the traffic that was tied to the shooting. So I found out about it en route to the building. So you can imagine knowing that had I been a half hour early for my doctor's appointment, I could have been in the mix of that, right? And then I immediately think back to a year or so prior to that, when the city of Annapolis experienced 13 homicides in 12 months. And these communities suffered. And at that time, I'm bringing the point up. I'm a very optimistic and positive person, but I'm bringing it up because I want us to understand the difference between the Annapolis that we're talking about. It wasn't until the 13th homicide, and actually it was a New Year's Eve celebration, that the mayor at that time, not our current mayor, our previous mayor, showed up publicly. And it was at the corner of Clay Street and West Washington. And Bishop Coates was there. Bishop Carroll, I believe, organized it. And there were so many parents there who had lost their children over that course of that time. And at that time, no crisis communications folks had been out to them, no follow-up therapy. Children in neighborhoods continued to play, ride, big wheels, the same day in some of those cases. The league and the academy I talked about, we had about 4 or 5 people who were directly tied to those shootings, either they coaches, parents, siblings, to those young people that had been, whose lives had been lost. And so what tears at my heart is the fact that we could have any lives lost and we not have the same level of outrage and the same level of interest. And imagine if it's like what it's like at the Capitol every day, to live in a community where you hear shootings every single day. And so the trauma is really the part in terms of community impact. We walked this past Saturday in Eastport Terrace and Harbor House. And before we got out into the street and was in the community center, a parent came in and crying and said she had lost 2 sons in Eastport Terrace, and that her and her daughter can't sleep at night. This happened in 2013. And she's still sick, she's still traumatized. Fortunately, she's working for the last 10 years, so she has health care and she has access to mental health support. But imagine those families who don't have those type of support systems. That's the type of impact that it's having on our community.
So there's your illustration. 6 out of 6, of course. Remember, you were on Route 50. Everybody remembers exactly where they were. I remember I was at home, and where did I get the news? Same way you get the news these days, right on this little thing. And I called Rick immediately and found him in the very difficult task of notifying the families at that stage. So that's the impact. That was the moment. That was the day. What about now? What about the course of the 12 months? How has the impact changed, sunk in, altered, gone away for the community? Tell me what you think.
Am I starting? So, is it me? So first of all, I think what has been astonishing and wonderful is the way the Capitol has kept this event in our minds every day, reading about those victims every day. And that has been, for me, an amazing thing, because so many of these shootings are forgotten and do not live in the memories of others. But I think that,
Exactly as Peter Manseau said right here.
yes,
Just before lunch, what happens in the wake of these things? You have a rush of concern,
and then
then
it goes
gun
away.
sales spike.
But
So
I
that's the automatic reaction.
But I think the point that is being made here is that there is gun violence happening in our city every single day. And I've dreaded talking about this because I don't want one event to outweigh the other, because they are all incredibly painful and traumatizing for the children and for the people that they are happening to. And I've been working in Annapolis for many years. In the last 3 years, I've sat down on the floor with young people, grieving mothers, and talked about the violence in those communities. And the trauma is horrific and real and lived with every day. People are scared. I will simply say that what unites these things, it seems to me, is what really no one wants to talk about, and that's guns. So obviously I'm not from this country. I grew up in a country without guns, and I surely know the difference. So at some point, guys, whatever side of this you are on, I believe we all have to get the courage to have that conversation. And we can talk about trauma, and you all know I can talk about poverty and all of the institutional racism. I can talk about it. I can talk about all of it. We need to start talking about guns.
Bishop Coates, how has it changed?
I think it's opened the door for a broader conversation with more people at the table. It's kind of like if you look at a picture and you focus on one area of that picture and you think it's, wow, this is beautiful, but then you realize as you widen the lens, you see a lot more of the picture. And I think that pain is pain. And I think it's important that out of this, in our pain, we begin to identify as one Annapolis. One example would be a young man who lost his life in Eastport, and the community came to the place where it had taken place. But interesting enough, it did not take place on Hacker properties. Not to say that he should have lost his life, but I see the benefit of it not happening on that property because it brought more people to the table that maybe would not have been at the table. And so as a result, for the past year and 3 months, we've been Eastport working together, which is really a working together where we are talking about these issues, talking about what we have in common and how can we begin to change this paradigm, you know. So I would say that it's opened the door for a broader conversation that's brought more people to the table.
Do you agree with that, Twan?
I do agree. I still think Annapolis is one of the safest cities in the country. And I love Annapolis. The thing about this city, it's solvable. It is solvable, very solvable. If you put the necessary resources inside the community, you can de-escalate it, because one thing, when I was working for social services, I had a driver's license program. You get these guys a driver's license, they're not in the neighborhood. They're driving somewhere else legally.
That's one solution.
So here's a date. Here's a date. I want everybody in this under this tent to remember. June 28th, 2016. That's the year Charles Carroll Jr. was shot to death in Annapolis. We can remember. We can solve this. Read, this is not a sales pitch. Read the local newspaper. Read the words we wrote about Eddie, Trade a Kid. We write about, we try and write about every gun violence victim. We can't. Some of them don't have a story that is easy to tell. But we try and show in very real, factual terms what the cost of gun violence is in Annapolis. It's not just us. Remember June 28th, 2016.
Kathleen?
I think that really illuminates what the opportunity that is presented to this group today and to the city of Annapolis is to remember that, both sides of that. Just as I've worked for 40 years in the substance use disorder field. And what we found is that, heroin would only happen to the others. It didn't happen. It only happened in those neighborhoods. And then all of a sudden it happened in the upper class neighborhoods, and then there was an illumination of it. And I do think that what happens out of some of these traumatic events is it's an opportunity to change the way we think about all of these issues. The day that this happened, I was with a group of students from Great Mills High School who had had the devastating shooting, and we were working with that. When this happened at Annapolis, it reopened and tore open that trauma. Just as in those neighborhoods where there are shootings every day, those children and those people are confronted with ongoing trauma, and it's cumulative. And the neuroscience tells us that it changes the brain. And so trauma begets trauma, and it is amazing that people can stand up and work. What I've noticed in this group and in the city of Annapolis is a collective healing that takes place and the opportunities that are presented out of a horrific experience.
Darius, talk also about how it has changed in the year, if it has.
Well, there was I believe the homicide, there was a twin that was killed that Bishop Coates is talking about. And at the time, the mayor wasn't the mayor, but he came out on that corner that night. I remember it. And, hurt people, to your point. And so what's changed is it did galvanize our city. I've been working in community organizing and around
What's your evidence of that? The galvanized.
So I'm going to thank you for that question. I attended the ACT meeting before the last general election, and I'd never seen as many people. The meeting was supposed to start at 7 o'clock. At 6:30, it was standing room only at First Christian Community Church, which is over 1,200 people. At 7 o'clock, when the meeting started, there were still cars in the street trying to get into the parking lot. I'd never, ever seen that much energy galvanized, not only in Annapolis, but throughout my time in working in Chicago, just all over the country. And so I saw people come together, but I also saw action take place. And so a generally Republican county became a Democratic county executive who has a heart and has already put in place a task force to address violence in all of the county. A mayor who saw fit to bring today together and hire people who have the energy and the passion around addressing these things. That to me is evidence. The question is, what do we do now that we've started to muster these resources? How do we sustain that energy?
I've got lots more questions, but any of you at any point stand up and ask a question. Pamela, or any of you really, there's a special problem across the country of guns in schools and in the hands of children. How do we deal with it?
I mean, we've got to be brave. The whole of the country has to be brave. And we really have to look at some of the cultural norms in this country. It's really as simple as that. And I'm just going to be honest. I'm lucky enough to live in both Annapolis some of the time. I'm pretty comfortable in public housing. I grew up in public housing. I feel okay there. And obviously I fit into the other world of Annapolis. That is not galvanized. Those two worlds live apart. And I don't want it to be so. I don't. But I've got to stop saying that it's not. It's not galvanized. So what is everyone's responsibility first there to try to bring those two Annapolises together? And that's everyone's responsibility. And then when we've done that, how do we have a sensible conversation about what you can do locally around gun control? That's what I would say.
I think sometimes when you are asked certain questions, your answer almost seems like it's too simple, but you wonder why not. immediately I say metal detectors at the entrances of our schools. And I also believe one way we deal with this is not assume it can't happen here. In our city, I serve on the Blue Ribbon Commission for the county school system, and each year I go to many graduations, and I walk away with the biggest concern that we let our guard down at the most critical time. For example, to just let anyone in because it's graduation. But we require people to stop and show ID if they're coming there because their kid forgot their lunch. It should be the same standard regardless. Because to me, someone who wants to plan to do something, they look for opportunities where we are sleeping. So.
I don't know how to solve it, to be perfectly honest. One of my things that I can say is learn how to de-escalate. Because the conflict resolution is like, how do I de-escalate? If I'm mad at somebody in my community and I'm scared, how do I walk away with that with my head held up high and not become a victim? So I have to show a certain level of toughness anyway. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but I know that guys in my community have a problem with taking it down a notch and able to walk away with their head held high. The saying is a good run beats a bad stand any day. Well, that doesn't really happen anymore. We got to stand. We got to take care of this right now. So I don't have an answer.
Rick, it's a special problem. Guns in schools, the security of kids in schools, the attitude and frame of mind of kids as to whether they feel they are safe. It's a big story.
So, another date, June 7th, 2016. Kimitzi Brown was killed accidentally by her boyfriend. He dropped his gun out of his pants. So teenagers, she was 17, I think he was 18. So teenagers do have guns. I believe the guy the young man, he had a gun because he felt he needed it for protection. Just what you all are talking about, that there's no way to resolve conflict. There's no way to de-escalate. In terms of guns in schools, I'd be very careful about what I said that's a problem here. One of the things that we seek is information about guns, which is harder to come by than you think. The ATF special agent who was here, very professional, and you can look on their website and read the trace report from Maryland, and it has certain information. The database is not open to the public. It's written into the law. The mayor has asked the Annapolis Police Department to do a review of the last 2 years and then going forward and do an annual gun report. I learned this morning that it's been completed, but it hasn't been released yet. So information is out there. We need more information about these things before we're going to find any solution. And I will just say, the answer is not to try and take away all the guns. Like it, leave it, hate it, love it, the right to own arms is written into our Constitution. It is part of the fabric of our society. All you have to do is take an English literature class to know that guns is part of who we are. That's not going to change. You might as well try and wave a wand and give us all wings. It's just not going to happen. There are, however, solutions that can be sought. And there are things like maybe there are things like the TAPS Act, which is a legislation in Congress that uses a law enforcement technique to identify people who are at greatest risk of committing acts of violence. There are all sorts of personal freedom rights involved in that. So there are solutions. They are not as easy as saying we're going to pass more gun control laws.
Go ahead. You have a question? I know your voice will carry.
So my question is, my friend, you say it's in the Constitution and it's not going to change. Quick history refresh for the two of us. The Constitution originally had how many amendments? Oh, you're asking me questions. Yeah. Just say what you 10. The Bill of Rights. I'm going to get it wrong and I'm going to be embarrassed. 10. The Bill of Rights. Okay, remember the Bill of Rights? How many amendments are there to the Constitution now? 27. The Constitution has been changed 17 times. So for us to say at any point, oh, gee, it's in the Constitution, we can't do that. It's already been done 17 times. And if we are living in a society where close to 400 children get shot a year, we're close to 40,000 people, and before the Heller decision, 12,000 isn't a happy number from 2008, but it beats the heck out of 40,000 in 2018, almost 40,000. That just looking at the statistics, common sense should tell you, irrespective of what's written down right now, what's written down now can change. And again, looking at history, and I'll sit down, the Second Amendment talks about a well-regulated militia. The guy who was sitting next to me in the last panel is part of our well-regulated militia, a police officer. The military experience I told you about, that's the Air Force, that's a well-regulated militia. We don't need everybody. We don't need 300 million guns on the streets. We just don't. And when we have them and then people modify them with bump stocks and turn something that's already a semi-automatic weapon into a machine gun, for us to just allow this to continue unabated is insane.
I
So, do you mind? So, I got this. So, you're a student of the Bible, and you know that the Bible is open to interpretation. Look in the Constitution and tell me where it says separation of church and state. The words are not in there. That is an interpretation. The Constitution is poetry. It is the poetry of democracy. And our job and the jobs of our courts and the jobs of our legislators is to interpret it for today. So you are right. It can be interpreted in ways that fit what's going on now. I am in no way an originalist of the Constitution, but there is the law of the land, and the Supreme Court has ruled that the Second Amendment does uphold the right for an individual to own firearms. It's the law. So you're right. You can change the law. You can change the courts. Look around us. Look at the debate. There's no one here from the gun rights advocacy group because they wouldn't participate. You cannot just say, it must change, and it's going to happen. This is a long process. We will not answer this question today. We will not answer this question tomorrow. The important thing is to have the discussion. And part of that discussion has to be the realization that both sides in this, those who want to end gun violence and those who want to retain the right to own a firearm, they're both right.
So, in the United States, we know how to spend money to change things when we want them changed. Two planes flew right into the World Trade Towers. How much money have we spent to keep that from happening again? How many people died? How many people are dying due to handguns, to guns in America every year since then? Lots more, multiple times more. So if we want to keep people from dying, we can do it. We can change the law.
All right, let me ask Kathleen to pick up on that and to continue.
Having responded, I feel like the Forrest Gump of trauma response. I responded after 9/11. And what I say, and I really appreciate this debate on guns, but we keep having the same debate, and we keep having it, and people continue to die, and young people continue to have guns. What I am going to focus my next chapter on is really the children. I've kind of given up on the adults in the debate and who's got rights and who's got their guns and how we're doing it. We know who a lot of these young people are early on, and we do nothing, and we wait. And we know the kids who are isolated and the kids who are bullying and the kids who have no one. We have to be that someone. And so for me, I'm looking at the community impact as a result of this is certainly to continue the debate on guns. I believe in it. I would like to fight for that. I think I was glad to hear the NRA has gotten into some difficulties. That was in the morning news. That made my morning. But what I would really say is that the work that communities need to do is to see the children. Children need to be seen. I came out of poverty, and I have been able to soar because there were people who reached out and who saw me. And what I would say is that every 3, 4, and 5-year-old that you know and that you let be in trouble and not be seen, those are the ones, are the future ones who will be looking for the guns or looking for the ways to wreak havoc. So we really need to be part of the helpers in the community so that we have less children looking for guns.
Darius Stanton, tell us what you think, and then we've got another question right here.
So I quit my timer so I could make sure I was at 2 minutes. My first minute I want to spend supporting your point with regard to our children. Repeat after me, please. It starts at home. So I totally agree that we should focus on children, but I would really believe we should focus on families. I was with Judge Green, the appellate court judge here in the state of Maryland this morning. He's retiring. And he said he sat on his grandfather's lap one day in church, and he didn't remember hearing his grandfather say this, but his family said it. And he looked at his grandson, which was Judge Green, and said, "You're going to be our family lawyer one day." So imagine Judge Green now, the appellate court judge here in the state of Maryland, the highest court in the land, being told that by his grandmother. And then look at children in our communities right now in the homes who are being called, excuse my expression, female dogs, little MFers, little D's, all kinds of ugly, derogatory names at 2, 3, 4, 5. This is in their homes. And so we wonder why children come to school and behave the way that they behave. How is it that children could be so mindless or thoughtless that they would break into a gun store in Montgomery County? The same young man, we worked to get him off a gun charge, and the same reason is because in the homes that these children are growing up in, there's abuse, neglect, and we have to focus on the home. So as much as we talk to the young men that are on the street corners with these guns, and as much as we talk to the children in the schools, it's the parents in those homes that are hurt, that are abused, that are neglected, and have seen the pain that this trauma that they experience is manifesting in their children. And so the resources that we place must be placed at home. As it applies to guns, we've got to be brave. As Ms. Brown said, we have to make change and put the pressure where the pressure should be applied. Quick look at what took place with opioid abuse versus crack. When crack cocaine was going rampant throughout the United States, here in the state of Maryland, there were no safe houses, there were no safe centers. You could not take your crack pipe and your crack devices to the fire department and the police department. But now that opioids has impacted white communities, you can show up at the police department and the fire station, turn in your drugs and your paraphernalia, and be sent to treatment and not to jail. When we want to make a change, we can make a change. We have to be brave.
Okay. Thank you very much. A question here.
I have more or less 2 comments, not a question. I am a product of gun violence. My brother went to prison for killing somebody. And a lot of my friends I lost because they got shot and killed. So I know exactly what you guys are talking about, and I sat here and listened to everybody, and I was trying to decide whether I was going to say something or not. But I was able to change because of my mindset. So if we change the mindset of the youth, then you open a whole new world to them. And my second point is the disconnect between the city and the inner city. There has to be a connection, because if you don't give the inner city kids any hope or dreams, or they have the hope to be able to fill out, to live their dreams, then they're going to destroy themselves. And they just don't see a future. So there needs to be, first of all, we need to bridge that gap. And we also have to change the mindset of the youth. And in order to bridge that gap, we have to give them activities or something to do. We have to not be afraid to go inside the communities and talk to them and speak with them and have a conversation, not more or less just, you can't do this, you can't do that, or try to tell them what to do. So changing someone's mindset, you could change their world. And then bridging that gap. Thank you.
The disconnect between the city and the inner city. You're the mayor. Talk about it.
So we can't be a great city or a great community until we make a great community for all of our citizens. So I think that this administration has done more outreach and more connectivity. Look, we've got a long way to go, but we know that the most important thing is to invest in the most marginalized communities in this city. And when you can change the environment, you can change outcomes. But without investment in these communities, it's wasted. You can't fix things in a vacuum. You can't just rebuild Newtown and not fix transportation and education and employment. All of those things have to happen together for us to get results. And I believe all the people in this room all agree with that. We are all marching in the same direction. It's painstakingly slow, but I think that, there's things happening now that will accelerate it. To look at the upside of tragedy, it makes people march towards action. And I see a lot of action here today. So thank you. Thank you.
Could I?
Rick Hutzel, I wanted to pick up on something you mentioned, which was the paucity of information, hard information on guns, on the latest study that you referenced. What's behind that? I mean, I'm asking you to extrapolate a little bit here, but what's behind that?
Some of it is because of the way the criminal justice system works. If you go out and shoot someone, the police are going to arrest you, hopefully. That's the goal. You will go to court, and the police will have the gun there, and they will say to the jury, this is the gun he used, and the jury will say, yes, he did it, and they'll convict him, and he'll go away to jail. That's how it works. So how the gun got here is not relevant to the issue of guilt or innocence. So prosecutors and police do not make an effort to share information on where guns used in crimes come from. It's not their job, as it's currently defined. So here's a really interesting thing that happened after June 28, 2018. The police stood up for some reason which we haven't answered, and I have nothing but praise for the police. Let me just say, this is not a criticism of them. And they responded with this statement. The man who was charged in the death of my 5 colleagues and friends purchased the shotgun legally. What does that mean? So here's the thing about buying a gun. If you buy the gun legally, first off, shotguns and handguns are regulated different in Maryland. That's what that legislation was about, trying to come up with some similarity. If you purchase a gun in Maryland and they put you through, I'm going to blank on the name of the background check, but the background check that Maryland puts you through for a long gun purchase, and they don't get an answer in 3 days, you get the gun because you have a right to buy a gun. They have to prove that you do not have something that would keep you from owning a gun. There is information about guns that is not, no priority is put on getting it to lawmakers. No priority is put on getting it to public health advocates because we're just starting to have that conversation. Where do the guns come from? How are they used? How many of them are there? How many of them are legally purchased, whatever that means? How many of them are obtained illegally? We don't know. ATF says they know how many guns seized by police in Maryland in 2017 came from out of state. How many came from in-state? Most of them came from Maryland. So there are all these questions that can answer, and some of the questions, there are all these information that can answer some of the questions we can have, and can hopefully help us find meaningful changes that will make it harder for someone to misuse a gun and hurt someone.
Okay, here's some hard information you had in your editorial yesterday. 23,000.
Very dangerous to ask me to remember yesterday's paper.
Yes, I
Focused on
understand.
tomorrow.
Very difficult. It's a daily paper, what can you expect? 23,777 applications for gun ownership were denied nationwide in fiscal 2016 and 17. Only 25 people were prosecuted for breaking the law.
Second, you're not allowed to apply for one if you're precluded, if you have a conviction or a mental health issue.
Second factoid, take it down to Maryland. 2016 to June of 18, Maryland State Police conducted 501 enforcement actions on failed applications for qualification licenses to have a gun and purchases. Of those, only 9 individuals were prosecuted in that same time. I mean, it's a devastating
So we
set
didn't know
of
what
numbers.
we didn't know what to make of that number. And I'll tell you, I had a reader call up who said, "What was that story about?" Because we read it and we had it, and the number is important. But what you make of it is up to lawmakers and prosecutors and police. They're the ones who have to interpret this. We, as a body politic, tell them how to do that. So do we want our law enforcement resources focused on prosecuting people who are not supposed to have a gun? You know, every couple of days, somebody goes into an airplane at BWI, and the Transportation Authority, the Transportation TSA, they put out a press release. Somebody brought a gun to BWI, and they show a little picture of the gun, and there have been pink guns and little guns and medium-sized guns. And you wonder, who the heck brings a gun to the airport? Have you not been paying attention? You know, do you not remember that we all have to take off our shoes because of Richard Reed, the shoe bomber? I mean, good Lord, could getting on an airplane be any more inconvenient? They don't identify the person who is charged by this because that's another agency. That's the Maryland Transportation Authority Police. And they don't put out a press release every time someone steps on an airplane with a gun because they have other things to do. So we have to wait a little bit and go and look it up in the court system and try and think, you know, is this worth us going back and writing the piece and connecting the name? Trying, you know, I mean, what's the point? Is anybody going to read that?
See, and there are legislative limits.
Sorry, I guess I was wandering. Sorry.
Right? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Give us a brief comment, and then you see this little clock here? It says it's just a couple of minutes to 2. A few minutes, and we're going to stop at 2. So
Okay.
go ahead and tell me what you have to say, and then maybe sum up a little bit, all right?
A quick observation. Right.
That was ultimately the problem, because a lot of times parents or Big Mama or somebody puts their foot in there behind, that is sort of an entree to make a change, to make a difference, and that did not happen.
Well, in the same community, just to give you a quick snapshot of numbers, in the same community of Robinwood, in less than 14 months, there were 7 parents who lost their children to Child Protective Services, right? Think of that in one community, right? One community, okay? The next number I want you to look at is in Baltimore City, which they had 500 liquor licenses over the legal limit, which got cut back to something around 350, 375. Over the legal limit. If you go look at the research, anywhere there's an enormous amount of gun activity or homicides, there's an enormous amount of concentration of liquor stores. So there's a direct correlation between liquor, gun violence, domestic violence, all right? And the other piece that ties to that is domestic violence, which is what also causes that trauma. So if you're in a house and a home where domestic violence is continuously impacting, then you're going to have some form of result as a result of that. But the other key number that I really can't accept is how we pay law enforcement to enforce the law. One is illegal gun sales. How many times do you see warehouse busts, trailers, gun trailer busts, where people are actually busing and breaking down? Sure, they have gun units, but those gun units are targeted on African American and people of color communities, where they're going in and attacking and pulling those guns out. But who's tracing and tracking and making sure from the gun, from tobacco and firearms, the FBI, who's making sure these guns are not coming into our communities? We can find Osama bin Laden in a hole in the desert, but we can't see with all the cameras in America and on our streets who is actually distributing guns in our community.
All right, thank you. Darius, I'm going to have to take that as your summation, and a very good one it was, Kathleen, and we'll just work down this way.
I mean, I think this is a lively discussion that warrants more. And I really would like to say that we need to break it down. We're trying to bite the elephant in one big bite. I think that there is the issue of guns. I really advocate that we really think that our hope for tomorrow rests with how we treat our children and what we do differently. And whether Big Mama or Grandmama or anybody, whoever is there, can be taught to deal with it differently. I do agree that it can be in the home, but it's the stereotype of what we think the homes are like. And what I would argue is that there's wonderful looking homes that have as much dysfunction as children living in poverty. I just really advocate that we focus on the children and really bring hope for tomorrow.
Rick, bring it on home.
I don't know what to make of this. I noticed this morning. How many people were here for the morning session? Okay, it was really interesting. I got frustrated because I asked questions for a living and I could only ask one. It was driving me crazy. So who noticed that the chief was packing? Annapolis carries a Smith & Wesson 40 caliber M&P, standard police issue. He was working. I got no problem with him carrying a gun. But did anybody in here even blink at it? Before we can address the issue of guns in our society, we have to realize that there's norms here that we all accept, that guns are right next to us. And we're okay with that until we're not, until it's the NRA because they're political. I know NRA members, none of them are in favor of killing people. Guns are a larger problem than just violence. They are a larger problem than just communities that have problems with dispute resolution. They are part of the fabric of who we are, like it or not. And until we can change that, we're going to be having these conversations.
Dwan?
I just appreciate being invited to this council. I mean, it's real important to me. My last thing is, this thing is solvable. You just got to do a targeted approach, because it's not a blanket solution. It's a targeted approach. What works for Robinwood doesn't work for Eastport, even though it's still poor, poverty community. For Newtown 20 or Annapolis Gardens, it doesn't work. What I see, you look at the community leaders, and you go find that one. Like, I'm a community leader in that community, and you elevate that one person, and they'll gravitate toward you. It takes a little bit of time, but they'll gravitate, and they'll pick up on it. That's my answer.
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone else said, except I would say that one of the things I think that is missing in our city, as small as the city is a collective effort where we all know what everyone else is bringing to the table. I think we have a lot of duplicated efforts because everyone's fed up and everyone's making desperate attempts to fix a problem. But I think it's critical that we have some type of collective understanding that we're all working on the same thing. And that we're working from different perspectives. And I think we have to chart our successors. We've got to be able to look at where we were last year and where we are this year and where we're trying to go next year. I think a city that's small, it should not be so disjointed and fragmented where we're all in different corners working on the same problem. So I would say we definitely need to come together as a group for this city's sake.
Hear, hear. Pamela, take us home.
So I'm going to end on an optimistic note. I think we have a level of leadership at the city and county level at the moment, and I'm going to agree with Mayor Buckley, that is both urgent, concerned, and listening. This is not a partisan comment. I know almost all of the county council, the city alderwomen and men, and they really have stepped up. And there really is this sense of, we really do want to fix this. And best of all, they are listening to some of the leaders who have been around for a long time, like Mr. Snowden and others. And I think the listening is really incredibly important. I think our county executive brings a level of kindness and humanity to all the issues that we just haven't seen. So that's my optimism. And I think with that level of leadership, anything's fixable, right?
Let's hope that's true. Thank all these fine people for their contributions.